Was the angel created before the sun, before light, before time itself began? Some ancient writings say yes, that before let there be light, there were already watchers in the heavens, laws written on divine tablets, and a calendar more precise than anything we use today. It's a version of creation most churches never talk about, a vision so radical, so ordered, so otherworldly, it was quietly removed from the Bible. Today we're exploring that book. It's called the Book of Jubilees, and once you understand what's inside, you'll understand why it was banned. If you're ready to see what religion tried to bury, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, Sacred Wisdom. We are truly grateful to have you here. Now let us begin. Hidden for centuries, silenced by religious councils, and preserved only in the highlands of Ethiopia, the Book of Jubilees dares to tell a story most churches won't touch. Known as Little Genesis, this ancient manuscript doesn't just echo the Book of Genesis, it rewrites it with explosive detail. It claims to reveal not only creation and covenant, but the very architecture of time and divine law. While most of the Christian world dismissed it as apocryphal, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church held on to it, treasuring its pages with the same reverence they gave to the Gospels. The question is, why? Why would one of the oldest Christian traditions preserve a book that others buried? What truth lies within its banned words? The Book of Jubilees claims a shocking origin, that during Moses' 40 days atop Mount Sinai, he received not just the 10 Commandments, but also this entire cosmic chronicle, dictated by an angel sent from the very presence of God. In this version, Moses is not merely a lawgiver, but the chosen listener of a divine history written in heaven long before the foundations of the world. It wasn't man-made, it was celestial. The angel revealed hidden events, divine laws, and sacred timelines recorded on heavenly tablets long before humanity ever sinned, worshipped, or wandered. That alone was enough to unsettle the early church, because if Jubilees is true, then God's law didn't start with Moses, it started before time itself. That idea wasn't just controversial, it was threatening. To accept it would be to unseat centuries of theology and question who really had the authority to say what was Scripture. During the 4th century CE, when powerful councils like Nicaea and Laodicea were shaping what would become the Western Bible, the Book of Jubilees was pushed aside. Why? Because it disrupted everything. It proposed a solar calendar that rendered the Church's liturgical structure obsolete. It offered a pre-Mosaic law that questioned the uniqueness of the Torah's timeline. And most dangerously, it claimed divine authority apart from rabbinic or church hierarchy. This was not a book that could be controlled, so it was silenced. Meanwhile, in Ethiopia, a very different story unfolded. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, one of the oldest Christian traditions in the world, not only preserved the Book of Jubilees, they canonized it. For them, it was sacred scripture. To this day, Ethiopian priests chant from it. Generations have grown up with its stories of angels, timelines, and truth. And this begs a deeper question. Did Africa guard a secret the West rejected? The 20th century changed everything. In the hidden caves of Qumran, near the Dead Sea, archaeologists uncovered one of the greatest biblical discoveries in human history, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among them were not one, not two, but multiple copies of the Book of Jubilees. This wasn't a fringe text. It was revered, copied, and protected by one of the most devout and separatist Jewish communities of the Second Temple era, the Essenes. They believed Jubilees held keys to holiness, timekeeping, and spiritual warfare, and suddenly the scholarly world had to reckon with a buried truth. If the Essenes loved it, and Ethiopia preserved it, and Moses received it from an angel, then why was it banned? Could it be that the Book of Jubilees was not erased because it was heretical, but because it was too holy, too radical, too empowering? The truth was never lost, it was hidden, and maybe, just maybe, you were never meant to find it. But the mystery runs deeper than existence. This book doesn't just survive, it speaks. and in its pages we find a story of time that's nothing like we've been told. What if the calendar you've lived by your entire life, the one that determines your days of worship, your seasons, your years, is wrong, not slightly off, not marginally mistaken, but fundamentally disconnected from the rhythm God originally set in motion? That's the claim made by the Book of Jubilees. In its opening chapters, this ancient text introduces a radically different concept of time, a 364-day solar calendar, not based on the shifting moon, but on a fixed, divine pattern ordained at creation. According to Jubilees, God didn't just create light on the first day, He created sacred time. And time, like the Sabbath, was holy. Jubilees declares that this solar calendar was given by God, observed by angels, and written on the heavenly tablets as the only true way to measure sacred seasons and festivals. Unlike the lunar calendar adopted by many cultures, including the Israelites after the exile, the solar calendar, described in Jubilees, is mathematically perfect. It divides the year into 4 equal seasons, each consisting of 91 days, exactly 13 weeks. This structure maintains the alignment of holy days such as Passover and the Day of Atonement across all generations. There are no leap years, no fluctuating feast days, no guesswork. Jubilees insists that this system was not a cultural suggestion, but a divine ordinance. When humanity abandoned it, Jubilees warns, they did more than just fumble a few dates. They fell out of alignment with heaven. In one of its most ominous warnings, the book states, "There will be those who will surely make observations of the moon, but they will disturb the seasons and make an abominable day the day of testimony." Jubilees, chapter 6, verse 37. To many that sounds extreme, but to the authors of Jubilees and to the Ethiopian church that preserved it, it's a matter of spiritual survival. Following the wrong calendar isn't a logistical error, it's rebellion. Jubilees presents the idea that time itself is a covenant, not a convenience. When we mark time properly, we step into the same rhythm followed by Adam, Noah, Abraham, and the angels themselves. But when we rely on human systems that drift from God's design, we invite chaos, both in nature and in spirit. The corruption of calendars, Jubilees claims, is one of the reasons why festivals began to fall on the wrong days, and why generations lost their connection to divine holiness. This is where the contrast with modern Christianity becomes uncomfortably sharp. If Jubilees is to be believed, much of the church world today, regardless of denomination, operates on a calendar that heaven never approved. Sunday worship, movable feasts, even Easter, all float through the year based on lunar traditions or man-made adaptations. Meanwhile, Jubilees speaks of fixed, eternal dates written on tablets in heaven. It even attributes global spiritual disorder to the abandonment of this sacred structure. In Jubilees, chapter 6, verses 34 to 38, it says, "All the children of Israel will forget, and will not find the path of the years, and will forget the new moons and seasons and Sabbaths, and they will go wrong as to all the order of the years." But there's one place where this sacred rhythm has survived: Ethiopia. The Ethiopian calendar, still in use today, bears a striking resemblance to the structure described in Jubilees. It consists of 12 months of 30 days, with a 13th month added to complete the year. Festivals and fasts are fixed to solar cycles, not lunar ones. Could it be that the descendants of ancient faith preserved not only the book, but the way of time itself? Could Ethiopia hold the key to realigning ourselves with heaven's clock? If so, then the Book of Jubilees isn't just a forgotten manuscript. It's a cosmic correction, a blueprint for spiritual realignment that was buried for 1600 years. And that raises a terrifying question. If we've gotten time wrong, what else have we misunderstood? Are we worshipping on the right days? Are we celebrating holy days heaven no longer honors? And if we've lost the calendar, have we also lost the rhythm of God? In a world consumed by artificial schedules, economic quarters, and arbitrary holidays, Jubilees cries out with a divine alarm. Return to the order I gave you. Return to sacred time. If time itself was rewritten, What else have we misunderstood about the earliest days? Let's go back further, to the very structure of heaven. The book of Genesis begins with a simple but majestic phrase, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." But the book of Jubilees pulls back the curtain even further. It dares to reveal what happened before that beginning. According to this text, when God said, "Let there be light," he wasn't speaking into an empty void. He was speaking into a heavenly realm already alive with divine order. In Jubilees, chapter 2, verse 2, it says, "On the first day he created the heavens which are above, and the earth and the waters, and all the spirits which serve before him, the angels of the presence, the angels of sanctification." This isn't just a poetic flourish. It reframes everything. Before there were people, plants, or planets, there were angels, and they weren't watching, they were working. These celestial beings weren't mere messengers floating through clouds. Jubilees describes a hierarchy of divine governance. Angels were appointed to manage creation. Some ruled the winds, others governed the sun and stars, while still others maintained the holiness of space and time. This was not mythology, it was heavenly administration. The angel of the presence who dictated the book to Moses is portrayed as God's most trusted envoy, his recorder, teacher, and voice. Through this angel, Moses is shown the blueprints of reality, not just what happened, but why it happened, and how it all connects to an eternal timeline written in heaven. That timeline is one of the most radical concepts in the Book of Jubilees, the heavenly tablets. These are not symbolic, they are literal, sacred records kept in the presence of God that contain every commandment, every covenant, every holy date, every prophecy. Jubilees claims that everything from Adam's creation to the coming of the Messiah was already written before it unfolded on earth. Jubilees chapter 5 verse 13 states, "And all their deeds are written on the heavenly tablets. They will not be forgotten before the face of all." This doctrine destroys the idea that divine law developed gradually or evolved through time. In Jubilees, the law is eternal, unchangeable, and angelically upheld. But it doesn't stop there. The Book of Jubilees doesn't just place angels in the background of creation, it places them in direct relationship with humanity. It says that Adam learned the law from angels, that Noah received warnings through them, and that Abraham was taught the sacred calendar by heavenly messengers. The implication is staggering. We didn't invent righteousness. We inherited it from beings who stand in the presence of God. That's why disobedience isn't just sin, it's betrayal of a cosmic order. It's why Jubilees treats the Sabbath not as a Jewish custom, but as a universal ordinance observed in heaven before man ever walked the earth. In Jubilees, chapter 2, verse 30, it says, "He sanctified it for all ages, and appointed it as a sign for all his works." And so the origin story is no longer simple. It is not just about Adam and Eve in a garden. It's about a universe designed in harmony, administered by angelic hosts, operating on sacred time, and recorded in eternal scrolls beyond our world. Every deviation from that order, from corrupted calendars to abandoned commandments, is portrayed not as ignorance, but as rebellion. Jubilees does not allow for casual faith. It calls you to return to a system older than Genesis, higher than Moses, and guarded by angels. The question isn't just, do you believe? It's, are you in sync with heaven? But not all angels remained pure. Some crossed the boundary between heaven and earth, and what followed changed the world forever. In the book of Genesis, the fall of man is a quiet act of disobedience. A serpent speaks, Eve listens, Adam follows, and humanity is cast out of Eden. But in the book of Jubilees, that moment is only the surface. Beneath it lies a spiritual war. According to Jubilees chapter 3 verse 17, the serpent was not acting alone. He was being used by a darker power, Mastema, the prince of evil spirits. And he said through the mouth of the serpent, because he had become envious of Adam and his descendants. In this telling, sin didn't begin in the garden. It began in the heavens. A jealous spirit, what later theology calls Satan, manipulated creation to corrupt humanity. It wasn't just temptation, it was sabotage. And it worked. Adam and Eve not only disobeyed, they lost their glory. Jubilees chapter 3 verse 26 says, "On that day Adam and his wife went out from the Garden of Eden, and they dwelt in the land of Elder. And Adam called the name of his wife Eve. And they had no covering, and they were naked. The garments of light, symbolic of divine favor, were stripped away. And worse, the spiritual gate between heaven and earth was damaged. But this was just the beginning." Jubilee shows that the greatest threat to mankind wasn't just sin. It was what came next, forbidden knowledge, delivered by fallen angels. Enter the Watchers. These were angels sent to guide and protect humanity, but they fell in love with what they were sent to guard. In Jubilees chapter 4 verse 15 it says, "The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took for themselves wives, and they began to defile themselves." These angels crossed a sacred boundary. Their union with human women gave birth to giants, the Nephilim, beings of terrifying strength and ravenous appetite, and with them came secrets mankind was never meant to possess. The Watchers taught men sorcery, astrology, how to forge weapons, and how to manipulate the elements. Jubilees chapter 8 verse 3 says, "And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants." On the surface, this sounds like science or medicine, but Jubilees frames it as rebellion. These were divine mysteries reserved for angels, released prematurely into human hands. And with that knowledge, humanity accelerated toward chaos. Corruption spread like wildfire. The Nephilim began to devour not only animals but humans. Civilizations fell into violence, idolatry, and war. Jubilees chapter 5 verse 2 paints a bleak picture, "And lawlessness increased on the earth, and all flesh corrupted its way, and they began to devour each other." God saw that the earth, meant to be a reflection of heaven, had become a mirror of hell. And so he made a decision, one that would reshape history. He would erase everything and start again, with one man. That man was Noah, a righteous remnant in a world gone mad. Jubilees highlights his faithfulness but also his awareness. Noah knew of the Watchers. He knew of the evil spirits that lingered. And in Jubilees chapter 10, after the flood, he begs God to bind their influence. "Let not the spirits of the evil ones rule over the children of the righteous." God answers his plea, binding 9/10 of the spirits, but allowing 1/10 to remain as a test for future generations. And that brings us to a chilling reality. According to Jubilees, evil didn't drown in the flood. It still walks among us. This version of the fall isn't just about eating fruit. It's about spiritual infiltration, divine betrayal, and forbidden knowledge that spiraled the world into judgment. It reframes sin not as childish rebellion, but as a cosmic infection, and it forces us to ask, how much of that ancient corruption still survives today? Have we merely updated the names, science, power, ambition, for the same dark wisdom? Jubilees warns us, the Watchers may have fallen, but their legacy still shapes our world. And as chaos spread, one question remained: where was God's law? Jubilees gives an answer few dare to consider. It was always there. When most people think of God's law, they think of Moses, the 10 Commandments, the stone tablets, the fiery mountain. That's when divine law began, right? Not according to the Book of Jubilees. This book doesn't just challenge that timeline, it obliterates it. Jubilees claims that God's law existed before Moses, before Abraham, before Adam. It was written on heavenly tablets, kept in the presence of God, and followed by angels long before humanity ever received it. Jubilees chapter 3 verse 31 says, "And the law and the testimony and the statutes were written for them on the heavenly tablets before they were created." In this view, Moses isn't receiving something new, he's receiving something ancient, something eternal. That's why the patriarchs in Jubilees, Adam, Noah, Abraham, don't live by instinct or vague morality, they live by law. Adam is taught about the Sabbath and clean animals. Noah knows how to offer sacrifices and discern between righteous and unrighteous acts. And Abraham? He doesn't just believe, he obeys. According to Jubilees chapter 15 verse 1, Abraham keeps the commandments before they're ever given on Sinai, and he began to observe the Feast of Weeks, and all the ordinances of it, according to the commandment written in the heavenly tablets. That means the idea of a lawless age before Sinai is false. The law was always there, the people just kept forgetting it. This turns traditional theology upside down. If God's law was not revealed for the first time on Sinai, then his expectations of holiness were never based on national identity or temple rituals. They were universal, moral, and cosmic. Jubilees presents the law as the very fabric of creation. Just as gravity holds the physical world together, divine commandments hold the spiritual world in order. That's why when people disobey, it's not just disobedience, it's tearing the threads of the universe. Sin isn't just personal, it's cosmic vandalism. Circumcision, for example, is often seen as a unique Jewish ritual instituted with Abraham, but in Jubilees it's part of a much older, heavenly covenant. In Jubilees chapter 15 verse 25 it says, "There is no circumcision of the days and no passing over one day out of the 8 days, for it is an eternal ordinance, written and ordained on the heavenly tablets." In other words, circumcision wasn't a cultural sign, it was a symbol of alignment with a timeless divine order. The same goes for the Sabbath, dietary laws, and even purity laws. They weren't given to oppress, they were given to restore balance. And what about the Mosaic law itself? In Jubilees, it's not a reaction to sin or rebellion. It's a reintroduction of what humanity once knew but had forgotten. Moses becomes not an innovator, but a restorer. He reopens the vault of heaven and reminds God's people of what was always written. That's why the Book of Jubilees says in chapter 6 verse 17, "And the law and the testimony were written on the heavenly tablets before the foundation of the world." If that's true, then ignoring the law isn't just rejecting Moses, it's rejecting heaven. But Jubilees doesn't stop at theory. It connects the law to rhythm. The observance of the 364-day solar calendar isn't just a matter of scheduling, it's an act of obedience. Holy time is law. Festivals like Passover and the Feast of Weeks are not seasonal celebrations, they are eternal appointments written in God's cosmic planner. Jubilees chapter 6 verse 34 says, "And all the children of Israel will forget and will not find the path of the years. And they will go wrong as to all the order of the years." Forgetting the calendar means forgetting the covenant. In a world where many see God's law as outdated, burdensome, or even abolished, Jubilees offers a radical challenge. What if God's law was never a temporary burden, but an eternal gift? What if holiness isn't legalism, but alignment with heaven's deepest rhythm? And what if the real rebellion isn't keeping the law, but pretending we've outgrown it? Jubilees doesn't force you to become Jewish or legalistic. It invites you to step into a pattern that predates the world and echoes in eternity. But if this truth was known from the beginning, then who preserved it when the world forgot? To find that answer, we look to the mountains of Africa. While the Western world buried the Book of Jubilees in forgotten libraries and apocryphal lists, one place held it close: Ethiopia. For centuries, while Europe debated what books belonged in the Bible, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church never questioned it. To them, Jubilees was not a curiosity, it was scripture. They read it aloud in churches, taught it to their children, and preserved it through empires and invasions. Why Ethiopia? Why this ancient African nation, far from the theological power centers of Rome and Constantinople? Maybe the better question is, why not? Ethiopia's spiritual lineage runs deep. In Acts chapter 8, we read of the Ethiopian eunuch, the first African convert to Christianity, baptized by Philip himself. Even before that, Ethiopia is connected to the house of Israel through figures like the Queen of Sheba and the descendants of Cush. Jubilees itself confirms this broader spiritual geography. In chapter 8, verse 29, it describes the division of land after the flood and explicitly mentions the inheritance of Ham, whose descendants settled in Africa. This isn't coincidence, this is covenant. But there's more. According to Jubilees, not only did African lands have divine purpose, they preserved divine truth. While Western empires shaped Christianity into a tool of conquest and hierarchy, Ethiopia kept the flame of early biblical cosmology alive. Their version of time, rooted in the solar calendar of Jubilees, reflects that original divine rhythm. Their reverence for angelic mediation, holy festivals, and the eternal law mirrors what the early patriarchs lived by. Could it be that God chose this corner of Africa to protect what others rejected? This is no small thing. For centuries, Africans were told their faith was second-hand, imported by missionaries, dictated by colonizers, filtered through European theology. But the Book of Jubilees exposes that lie. The oldest known complete copy of Jubilees wasn't found in Rome or London. It was written in Ge'ez, the sacred Ethiopian script. In this narrative, Africa doesn't receive truth. It safeguards it, and that flips the entire script of Christian history for black believers around the world. For African American Christians, this hits even deeper. Imagine being told your spiritual roots come from slave ships, when in truth they may trace back to angelic scrolls carried across Ethiopian mountains. Imagine rediscovering that your ancestors weren't just captives, they were guardians of divine law. Jubilees brings this to light. It reconnects the African diaspora with the prophetic identity that Western Christianity tried to erase. And this isn't just about cultural pride, it's about spiritual inheritance. Jubilees shows that holiness, time, law, and prophecy were never European inventions. They were cosmic gifts, entrusted to nations willing to preserve them. Jubilees chapter 20 verse 1 speaks of Abraham teaching righteousness to all his sons, including those who settled far beyond Canaan. The implication is powerful. Africa was never excluded from the covenant. It was part of the plan all along. That's why the survival of Jubilees in Ethiopia matters. It testifies that God is not confined to cathedrals or councils. He speaks where hearts are faithful, not where power resides. And maybe, just maybe, he chose to preserve this book in a land overlooked by theologians, but not by heaven. For every black Christian searching for belonging, identity, and truth, the Book of Jubilees whispers, "You were never on the outside. You were always part of the story." And once you know who preserved it, you begin to ask a more dangerous question. Who tried to silence it, and why? The official reason given for banning the Book of Jubilees is that it's non-canonical, not inspired, not trustworthy, too strange. But once you read it, you start to understand the real reason. Jubilees wasn't banned because it was false. It was banned because it was dangerous. It challenges power. It exposes corruption. And worst of all, it puts the knowledge of heaven in the hands of everyday believers that terrified religious elites. How do you control people who know they don't need priests to interpret sacred time? How do you manipulate masses when they realize the true law existed long before Moses, before Israel, and long before Rome ever touched a scroll? Jubilees unmasks the myth of theological gatekeeping. It presents angels, not institutions, as the teachers of righteousness. It tells us Abraham already followed divine commandments centuries before they were chiseled in stone. And it insists that every holy day was written on heavenly tablets, unchangeable and eternal. In Jubilees chapter 6 verse 22, it declares, "All these I have written for you, so that you may observe them for all the days of your life." If this is true, then what do we make of all the altered calendars, modified feasts, and Sunday substitutions? The early church couldn't allow that. As Christianity merged with empire, theology became politics. Councils were called not just to discern truth, but to consolidate power. In the 4th century, when the Council of Nicaea began shaping the official canon, they chose books that supported institutional unity. Anything that highlighted heaven's authority over man's authority was a threat. Jubilees made the cut in Ethiopia, but not in Rome. Why? Because the Roman Empire couldn't tolerate a book that said God doesn't change, but men do. It reminded people of something uncomfortable. Truth doesn't bow to emperors. The Book of Jubilees also posed a problem for timeline theology. It contradicts rabbinic tradition, challenges Pharisaic lunar calculations, and even hints that certain authorities led Israel into error. It dares to say in chapter 6 verse 34, "And they will forget the new moons and seasons and Sabbaths, and will go wrong as to all the order of the years." That's not just critique, it's condemnation. Jubilees didn't just disagree with mainstream Judaism and Christianity, it exposed them. And for the keepers of religious order, that was unforgivable. But perhaps the boldest and most forbidden claim of Jubilees is its insistence that holiness isn't exclusive. You don't need to be born into a priestly tribe to follow the law. You don't need to speak Latin or Hebrew. You just need ears to hear and a heart willing to obey. That's revolutionary, and revolutions threaten kingdoms. So what do empires do with books that empower the poor, affirm the outsider, and dismantle clerical control? They burn them, they ban them, they bury them. And yet, the Book of Jubilees survived. It survived the councils, the censorship, the centuries, not in the libraries of popes, but in the hills of Ethiopia, not in Latin or Greek, but in Ge'ez, the language of black believers who refused to bow to colonial theology. And now, in our time, it resurfaces, rebuking the compromise of the powerful and calling us back to the law written before time. It dares to say what many fear: God's truth doesn't need your approval. So why was the Book of Jubilees banned? Because it dared to remind us that heaven keeps better records than Rome. So, what now? You've just heard the story of a banned book, a book buried for centuries, not because it was false, but because it was feared. Feared for its truth, feared for its power, feared because it dared to say God's law is eternal, sacred time is not negotiable, and the forgotten ones were never forgotten by heaven. The Book of Jubilees might not appear in most Bibles, but maybe that's the point. This was never about whether it belongs in a table of contents. The real question is, does it speak to your spirit? Does it stir something inside you that says, this was never meant to be hidden? Because truth doesn't ask for permission to exist, it just is. So don't just read what the world allowed, read what the world was afraid of. Seek truth for yourself, and if something in this video stirred your soul, don't let it stop here. Hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey of rediscovery, because there are more banned books, more hidden stories, and more truth waiting in the shadows. Until next time, thank you for watching, and we will be seeing you in our next videos.